Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you. This is a rally. We are so pleased to see you all here this morning. I am Carol Lavery. I am the chair on my last term as chair of the Crime Victims Alliance of Pennsylvania, and I say that in both celebration and remorse, because one of the reasons is this is the last time probably I will be up here in front of you to welcome you all to this fabulous partnered, networking, coalized, is that a word? Rally. It takes a network, it takes a group of people. It takes dedication, volunteer time, activism, advocacy to bring you this rally, this gathering today. And I am so proud of the people who have pulled that together, and you're going to hear a little bit more about them as we move through this. And I am so proud of all of you for coming to this rally this morning. Again, this is a rally. Crime Victims Alliance of Pennsylvania. I have now left 2 minutes to tell you what that is, and it's important to tell you about that because the Crime Victims Alliance is what the crime victims movement is all about. It's a group of people who need and want to gather together, to network, to talk to each other, to support each other, to educate each other, and to help each other move forward in a very, very difficult field, a very, very difficult task, a very, very difficult movement. But it's one that has survived since the mid-70s, a very long time, but one that has certainly not resolved what we came together to do. I do remember those early meetings. I do remember talking about we were going to end crime. That was what we were going to do. That was the goal. And it is an important goal and one that we cannot and should not ever lose sight of, because it is possible. When you look at what has happened over all of those years, but also what has happened over the last year, what is possible? There is so much that we can accomplish. And each of you is a part of that movement. Everything that you do every day to support someone else, to educate family, to educate coworkers, to educate communities, makes a huge difference in the lives of victims, in the lives of families, in the lives of communities. And I thank you for that. I thank you for coming together to hear our speakers, to be re-energized. And I thank you for your continued work, no matter how difficult that is to do. And I hope you will consider becoming part of the Crime Victims Alliance of Pennsylvania. A shout out to our table over there with membership forms. And please sign up and become part of that network, because you will love that opportunity to get together and support each other in that process. And again, very quickly, I thank you for coming. I'm going to, in a moment, introduce or bring up our next presenter. But before that, I do want to acknowledge a few people in this group, because there are so many important people. Actually, what I'd really like to do is go around the room and have each of you say your name out loud. But since the managing committee would have my head, we are not going to do that. But what I do want to do, again, is just acknowledge a few people in the room. And those include Valerie McMahon. McMahon is somewhere in, from the Director of Victim Services, the Bureau of, the Office of Victim Services, the Office of Victim Services, I should know that, at the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. I'd like to actually point out Karen Baker, who is the newly appointed CEO at the Pennsylvania, there she is back there, Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape. Rich Long from the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association is here. Greg Rowe from the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association was here and is somewhere around. And I know I have missed quite a few more individuals who we are sharing this responsibility, both Jen and I, and she will introduce the rest. But with this, thank you for coming, and I would like to bring up Monica Isaac, who is the chair of the very, very hardworking rally committee that has brought this together. And the rally committee is a partnership of victim service agencies from across the state of Pennsylvania who make this possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Good morning. On behalf of the Crime Victims' Rights Rally Committee, I would like to welcome you to the 26th Annual Statewide Crime Victims' Rights Rally. This year's theme is Expand the Circle, Reach All Victims. It emphasizes the importance of inclusion in victim services. This year's theme addresses how the crime victims field can better ensure that every crime victim has access to services and support, and how professionals, organizations, and communities can work in tandem to reach all victims. I want to thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to join with others at this event, and for all the ways you honor crime victims and the professionals who serve them. Crime Victims' Rights Week is celebrated locally and nationally the entire week of April 8th through the 14th this year. The Keystone Crisis Intervention Team, also known as KKIT, are present today and ready to assist anyone who may be in need of their support. KKIT provides a team of trained volunteers to support those who may benefit from a compassionate presence. You can locate them by the white ribbons they are wearing. I would like to take a moment to thank everyone who has made this event possible. Carol Lavery, chair of the Crime Victims Alliance of Pennsylvania, and Donna Van Mortel, co-chair. She's standing back at the table. And the entire rally committee for their hard work and dedication over this past year. This would not be possible without their hard work and dedication. It is now my pleasure to introduce the Honorable Jennifer Storm, Commonwealth Victim Advocate. Ms. Jennifer Storm was nominated by Governor Tom Corbett as Commonwealth Victim Advocate on November 8, 2013. Ms. Storm is responsible for advocating for the interest of crime victims throughout Pennsylvania. Prior to this appointment, Ms. Storm served as Executive Director at the Dauphin County Victim Witness Assistance Program, a nonprofit organization which provides direct services to victims of crime, community outreach, and training in victims' rights and crisis response services. She's the author of several books and magazine articles. Ms. Storm has received numerous awards for telling of her personal story of victimization, addiction, and recovery. I now welcome the Honorable Jennifer Storm.
Thank you so much, Monica, and to the Crime Victims Alliance of Pennsylvania. Good morning.
Good morning.
First and foremost, I want to acknowledge the most important people in the room, and those are the beautiful survivors and advocates who are standing with me here, and those of you that I see out in our audience. You are truly the reason we are here today. I want to thank Governor Wolf and his administration for their leadership on this vitally important and impactful issue. While the governor could not be here with us today personally, he extends his support and a proclamation declaring this week National Crime Victims' Rights Week in Pennsylvania. It is available at the Office of Victim Advocate table if you would like to read that. I am incredibly fortunate to work with what I believe is some of the hardest working advocates in the business. My staff are dedicated to ensuring that crime victims are informed, acknowledged, and empowered. Can I please have my staff who are present raise their hands? They love that. This year, the theme of our event, as you heard, is expand the circle and embrace all victims. I do believe in Pennsylvania that we are reaching that goal. In the past 2 months, we have seen a record number of legislative bills aimed at improving the experiences victims face in Pennsylvania, not only introduced, but passed with unanimous support. In fact, just a few weeks ago, I stood upstairs outside the Pennsylvania Senate and watched 7 of those bills go through the Senate with a 50-0 vote. Bipartisan support for victims. I truly believe that our Pennsylvania Senate deserves our debt of gratitude because that doesn't happen every day. If you're used to being in the halls of this building, this is phenomenal that we've gotten that type of bipartisan support for our issues. And it's thanks to the work of the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape, the Marcy's Law folks, all of the advocates that come here day in and day out to educate our legislators on the loopholes within our system and on the important pieces of legislation that can truly not only change the experience a victim has, but in some cases and in some of these bills that we were able to get passed, save lives. And that's ultimately the vital importance of the work that we do. So, talk about expanding circles. When you have bipartisan support in the Senate, I think that expands our circles pretty significantly. I firmly believe that the good men and women that serve in our House are going to follow the lead of our Senate, and they're going to take these bills up in the weeks to come, and I do believe we're going to see passage of super important legislation. I want to thank Senator Mensch, who was not able to be here today, who authored the proclamation in the Senate also declaring this week National Crime Victims' Rights Week in Pennsylvania. Last week, I stood proudly with Governor Wolf and many legislators as another package of bills introduced to address the epidemic of sexual harassment and misconduct in the Commonwealth. In addition, we saw the reintroduction of the anti-discrimination bills to ensure the protections of our LGBTQ citizens who we know are at a higher risk for victimization. It is 2018. And I, along with any other lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer person, can still be fired, thrown out of a business, or denied housing simply because of who they are. This is simply unacceptable. It leads to a pervasive attitude that then leads to a higher rate of victimization. I pray that this is the year that we end legal discrimination in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Yeah. While we have made a significant amount of forward progress for crime victims, I want to address one specific measure that I truly believe will be the single most important thing that we can do for crime victims, at least in my time, and that is called Marcy's Law. You see a lot of beautiful purple here today, and the signs behind me are all in support of Marcy's Law. Marcy's Law is a constitutional amendment that would elevate the existing rights of crime victims and give them legal standing. It would actually give meaningful enforcement of victims' rights for the first time in our Commonwealth. Today in Pennsylvania, we have incredible bills, many of which have been ushered by the wonderful advocates that are sitting here with you and the survivors. We have great legislation for victims. What we lack is the ability to enforce that legislation. So when a victim's right is violated, there's nothing we can do. So imagine you are a crime victim, right, for a moment. You enter a very confusing justice system. You're told by law you have the right to be informed, present, heard, conferred with. You have the right to restitution, right? These are rights that we have in our statute right now. Then imagine seeing your case being discussed on the 5 o'clock news, that your offender has entered into a plea deal and that they were sentenced and you had no idea. You were never informed, you were never present, you missed your opportunity to give a victim impact statement, and you were not able to put in for restitution. Imagine just for a moment how you would feel. I know some of you in this audience have experienced that, and I know how you feel because you have contacted me. Angry, violated, disempowered, frustrated. That's not what we want our crime victims in Pennsylvania to experience. When you call your victim advocate or you call the Office of Victim Advocate, we unfortunately have to tell you, we are so sorry that your rights have been violated, but there's absolutely nothing we can do for you. There's no legal recourse in Pennsylvania. You don't have standing in court in Pennsylvania. Imagine how that feels. I believe, personally, it's the single worst statement that I can ever utter to a crime victim. We have rights without remedies. It's like adding insult to injury. What Marcy's Law does is it takes those rights and it enshrines them into the very fabric of our Constitution in Pennsylvania, the document, in my opinion, that dictates the values that we hold dear as a society. And it says that you are a victim and you deserve to be informed and present and heard and financially made whole. And you deserve that so much that we're going to enshrine that into the Constitution, so that if and when that right is ever violated, you have a remedy. So what does a remedy look like? Doesn't mean that a victim has veto authority. Doesn't mean that a victim is a party to the case, right? Doesn't mean the victim gets to walk into court and say, this is how I want to see it done, this is what I want to happen to the offender, XYZ. They don't run the case. What it means is, if for some reason you're not informed about your case, or if it means for some reason a guilty plea is taken, you have the ability to motion the court and ask for reconsideration. And it's reconsideration of the fact that you weren't present, notified, or heard. Right? It's a way that we can meaningfully remedy mistakes that unfortunately our criminal justice and juvenile justice systems just make sometimes. Doesn't mean that the sentence for the offender is necessarily going to change. It means that we can remedy a wrong done by our justice system, and it means justice for the crime victim. We owe victims that extension of hope and inclusion. This is how we embrace all victims, ensuring their rights are protected at every turn so they're not further harmed by the very system that is set up to advocate for them and protect them. Rights without remedies is worse than having any rights at all. I've been told that by numerous times by crime victims. Why tell me I have these rights if they're only to be violated and I have nothing to do about that? It's painful for survivors. Marcy's Law will change that. You're going to hear a lot more about this effort in the coming months and weeks. In a few days, you're also going to see various points in the Commonwealth lit up in purple in support of Marcy's Law. You're going to see this very Capitol building light up in purple. You're going to see Boathouse Row in Philadelphia light up in purple, all in support of creating awareness for Marcy's Law. I want to thank Senator Guy Rushenthaler, who is unable to be here with us today, who also introduced Marcy's Law in the Senate, and again to the entire PA Senate for passing this unanimously. This bill now sits with our House Judiciary, where we encourage and believe that Representative Marsico will move this bill forward for a positive vote. One leader in particular is House Representative Sheryl Delozier, who stands out in our House as a true advocate for crime victims. She has authored many pieces of legislation that have meaningfully changed the way that victims experience the system in Pennsylvania. She's also the prime sponsor of Marcy's Law in the House. She's here today to present some remarks and present a proclamation on behalf of her colleagues. Representative Delozier.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to say a few words at this type of rally. The more that we can get out there and the more that we can educate people and share stories with people and let them know the impacts of our judicial system have what they have on them, the more that we can make sure that we can make some positive changes. And the opportunity to speak at this rally in particular, to be able to say that later on in the House, we will be voting on the House resolution designating the week of April 8th through 14th as Crime Victims Awareness Week in Pennsylvania. And as a lot of you know, and as Jen mentioned, I've been an advocate for victims' voices in our criminal justice system throughout my life. It is just something that is very important to me, and I feel that is missing within our very strong judicial system. And we have a lot of really strong DAs. We have a lot of people in the judicial system that really want what's best for our victims. And sometimes some things slip through the cracks, and sometimes some things don't happen. And that's what we need a Marcy's Law change for. In 2015, the last year's statistics that are available, at least 750,000 Pennsylvanians were victimized by crime, and of those, more than 300,000 were victims of a violent crime. While realistically we will never get this number down to zero, unfortunately, we must do all that we can to help make whole those that were victimized by another individual that made a very bad decision to make somebody else hurt. Crime touches everyone, and we stand here today. Someone in Pennsylvania right now is becoming a victim of crime through no fault of their own. Whether it's an assault, abuse, harassment, stalking, theft, robbery, becoming a victim of a crime is, no matter how serious that crime may have been, is a very personal and emotional situation. We must all work together to show how we would-be criminals that we are not letting them intimidate us. We will not let them invade our communities and continue their wrongful acts on our streets and in our neighborhoods. One of the best parts of the community is when we come together. One of them when we come together to support each other in our times of need. And I urge you to be one of those voices, one of those people that make sure that our community is working for the betterment of the victims, which is the goal, as Jen mentioned, of Marsy's Law, which we will need passed, and it will take a lot of work, and will take every single person in this rotunda today to advocate for the need to change our Constitution in 2 consecutive sessions. It is a long process. It is not something done quickly. We will need a long-standing campaign to get it done, and we ask all of you for that help. Because as Jen enumerated all of the things that we need for our victims in Pennsylvania, we need to make sure that we keep moving forward, that we don't take a step back, and we keep, even when we get pushed back, because we will, sometimes we'll run into, there is compromise, there's dialogue, there's all of these things that need to happen to get a constitutional change. And then we need the voters. So not only do we need the House, the Senate, and the governor, we also need the voters to make that change. And I think we can do it. It's doable. Other states have done it. And the passion that we have in this community, I think, can get it done. But we need your help. And I ask and advocate, any advocate that you can be, any force forward that we can make this stance. We need to do this in Pennsylvania and make this change, and I'm proud to be the sponsor in the House and working with the Senator to make sure that we get this done by the House and by the Senate with the governor's approval. So in conclusion, thank you for supporting victims and reaffirming that they are no less deserving of the rights, resources, restoration, and rehabilitation than the criminals that get them at this point. Thank you very much.
It is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Lynn Shiner. Lynn Shiner is an award-winning author of Stabbed in the Heart, 3 Murdered Children, 2 Resilient Mothers. Lynn has dedicated most of her career to crime victims after she experienced a tragedy of her own. Her young children, Jen and Dave, were murdered on Christmas Day, 1994. As the former director of the Pennsylvania Office of Victim Services, she oversaw the distribution of more than $100 million annually in state and federal funding to meet the needs of crime victims throughout the Commonwealth. She's the recipient of countless awards and has recently published a second book, Grief, the Event, the Work, the Forever. I now welcome Ms. Lynn Shiner.
Thank you. 34 years ago, I entered into a marriage, and within days the abuse began. My husband called me fat and ugly, and that I should be grateful to him for marrying me. During the 9 years of marriage, I rode a roller coaster of mental and physical abuse, with separations, calls to the police, protection from abuse orders. My husband achieved every abuser's ultimate goal, and that was to control me and isolate me from my family and friends. They knew nothing of the abuse. I was too humiliated to tell them that I had been raped by my husband, or that I had to sleep at night with a surveillance camera pointed at me because he believed I was leaving men in through the bedroom windows. He told me repeatedly that I was a worthless human being, a horrible mother, and that no man would ever want me. There are many reasons why women don't leave. I can only share mine. First, we had 2 beautiful children, Jen and Dave. My husband, self-employed, was making a 6-figure salary. We lived in a nice home in a safe neighborhood. The school was within walking distance. My salary at the time was only in the $20,000 range, and I worried, how would I ever make ends meet if I were to leave? I told myself, as long as he was only hurting me and not the kids, I could hang in there until they were a little older and out of daycare. Then somehow I would manage. In our 9th year of marriage, my husband came close to killing me in a fit of rage. A light finally went on. I knew in that moment that I wasn't going to make it till Jen and Dave were older. The day I made that decision to leave, it felt like several cinder blocks had been removed from my shoulders. The months that followed were extremely difficult with custody, divorce, child support proceedings, but it was still so much easier than having him under the same roof. And while I didn't want to keep Jen and Dave from their father, because of his violent tendencies, I did want their time together to be supervised. And to this day, I can still hear the voice of the judge ringing in my ears. Mother, just because he hurt you doesn't mean he'll hurt the children. Sadly, supervised visitation was denied. 18 months later, Christmas Eve, 1994, my ex-husband picked up Jen and Dave for an overnight visit as part of our custody order. I was to pick them up the following morning. That never happened. Early Christmas morning, my ex-husband stabbed our beautiful children to death before plunging a knife into his own heart. On the end table, next to the cookies and milk left for Santa, was a checklist that he had written, and the very last item on that checklist said, "Kill Jen and Dave." This was my ex-husband's ultimate act of revenge and my worst nightmare. Any parent's worst nightmare come true. My heart's racing. 23 years, and it's still not an easy story to tell, and I'm certain that it's not an easy story to hear either. After sharing my nightmare with you, I also feel both compelled and honored just to tell you a little bit about my children. With Jen, I can remember going to her softball games, and she would be in the infield doing cartwheels as the batter was swinging at the ball. With Dave, I remember pulling into the driveway from grocery shopping and him running out, wanting to carry all the groceries up into the kitchen. And I'm thinking, Lynn, you are doing a really good job raising this boy. And then days later, I would find ice cream and cookies and cheese curls lined up in the back of his bedroom closet. And one of my favorite memories of them together is the smiles on their faces when they gave me a bouquet of flowers on Mother's Day. There were bulbs attached. They came from the neighbor's yard. Sharing memories are important because it keeps those you love alive in your heart and mind. Never be afraid to share a memory. As a result of Jen and Dave's murder, I lost control of my life as I knew it. The murder and grief challenged my beliefs, stripped away my independence, confidence, future, and hope, leaving me vulnerable, exposed, dependent on others, incapable of decision-making and commitment. Over time, I began to regain some of that control by doing the hard work of grieving. In hindsight, the reflecting and telling and retelling of the event and talking about Jen and Dave was the most important part of my journey, my lifeline. In the beginning, every day was like Groundhog's Day. The only conversation for breakfast, lunch, and dinner was the murder and how much I missed them and how much I wanted to be with them. Telling and retelling is an empowering way for grievers to find their voice in search of a way to accept the loss, cope with what has been stripped from their life, and help them to find a way to weave the tragedy into their new life. A new reality. Not a new normal, as there is nothing normal about the murder of a loved one. A new reality. I worked hard at finding meaning, with my mission being to make sure Jen and Dave's death were not in vain. You don't have to be strong. You just need to be brave enough to face a minute, an hour, or a day at a time. My working grief I wanted to make sure that what happened to Jen and Dave wouldn't happen to any other parents, and I wanted to do whatever I could to help victims of crime. I became consumed with staying busy. I worked on establishing Jen and Dave's Law. I held 5 charity golf tournaments, raising over $160,000. I changed jobs just so that I could work with or on behalf of victims of crime. It was an incredible honor to be part of relationships and partnerships all over the state with victim service programs, advocates, coalitions, district attorneys, law enforcement, and many others, with a focus on assessing the needs of crime victims, strategic planning, and changing policies and laws to ensure victims' rights and needs were being met, and at the same time ensuring that they were treated with dignity and respect. And after using the Victims' Compensation Assistance Program to help me bury my children, I also needed to see the program overhauled, streamlined, and most importantly, become more victim-centered. And yes, there's always more work to do. 3 years ago, I wrote a book. I really wanted to share what that journey looked like. We always focus on the crime, but I wanted individuals to understand what the aftermath looked like, not only the aftermath, but what it looked like 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, because the journey doesn't end. Initially, my motivation was my own survival. I was fighting with everything I had to stay above water. And honestly, I had no clue the impact my efforts would have on other people. It's really important to remember that we all have scars on our souls. It's what we do with those scars moving forward that matters most. A piece of my heart will always be missing, but my memories have mostly become fond and comforting. My family, friends, coworkers, and the community have had a huge impact on my journey. Others remembering is probably the most precious gift that a survivor can receive. The cards, emails, calls around the holidays or their birthdays or Mother's Day, priceless. Jen's best friend asking me if she could be married on her birthday. A friend who never met Jen and Dave has never missed an opportunity to decorate their grave on their birthday or Christmas time. A police officer running into me 5 years ago, pulling out his wallet and showing me a picture of Jen and Dave that he's carried for all these years. Dear friends sending me a picture each year of them toasting the kids on their birthdays. People sharing stories and memories, amazing gifts that fill my heart. Sharing a memory or celebrating a life, regardless of how the person dies, has no expiration date. Remember, say their name, share a memory. You won't remind the person of their loss. Trust me, they haven't forgotten. It's simple. You love them forever, why wouldn't you grieve them forever? Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn, for sharing your story with us today. It is now my pleasure to introduce the Honorable David J. Arnold, Jr. Mr. David Arnold serves as the elected District Attorney of Lebanon County. He is currently in his 4th term, having been sworn into office in 2006. Prior to being elected District Attorney, he served as Assistant District Attorney in the Lebanon County District Attorney's Office, as well as spent 4 years in private practice handling civil litigation and criminal defense cases. Mr. Arnold is the immediate past president of the Pennsylvania District Attorney's Office. He also serves as vice president of the Pennsylvania District Attorney's Institute Board of Directors. I now welcome you, the Honorable David J. Arnold, Jr.
Good morning. To start off with, Lynn, your story is unimaginable, but your strength is also unbelievable. And, we think about the Senate passing some of these bills 50-0. It's not people like me who cause that, it's people like you that cause that. So all I can say on behalf of all the DAs is thank you. I do need to point out some of my colleagues that are here. My Lebanon County contingent, Beth Hoke, our victim witness coordinator, is present along with 3 of her advocates. Ladies, I could not be more proud of you and the work that you do and the chance I had to work with you, so thank all 4 of you for what you do in our office in Lebanon County. Honoring the rights of victims really evokes the highest ideals of a district attorney. Because more often than not, we encounter a victim of crime on their most difficult day. These people, the victims of crime, are looking for hope, they're reaching for strength, they're really digging for courage. And I can tell you that some of the strongest people I've met in my entire life are the moms and the dads, the children and the grandchildren, the aunts and the uncles who've lived the nightmares of robbery, rape, murder, and other cases such as this. And they've walked through our system, and with a grace and a fortitude that I really can't even explain to you if you haven't witnessed it, they pick up the pieces and they find a path. It's a new normal, so to speak, but they find a way to live their life again. And I think about the many crime victims we've had in Lebanon County in my time in the DA's office and the strength that they've shown. And I could go on and on with examples, but a brutally murdered young man beaten with a baseball bat. 7 years the family waited for us to obtain justice for them, and they kept in contact with us, and we kept in contact with them. And while it was a long road, we did eventually obtain justice for them. The multiple elderly men and women who were tortured and beaten in a so-called home health care facility, who were forced to sit in a cold, unheated garage and stuff newspapers for the people that are supposed to be taking care of them. And they had the strength to come forward, and they had the strength to, if needed, testify about the horrors that they had experienced. An elderly woman who discovered that a man who's supposed to be helping her, a supposed handyman, actually was stealing the most treasured possessions that her deceased husband had right out of her home while she's in the home with him, trusting him. And again, I could go on and on with stories such as these people, and I'm sure all of you could as well through your various occupations that you have here. But my point is, these brave individuals deserve justice, and they deserve a system that delivers that justice with fairness, with dignity, and with respect. National Crime Victims' Rights Week is a time to commemorate our ongoing efforts on behalf of all victims. But it's also a time to lean in and look ahead. Forward thinking about victims' rights is a Pennsylvania tradition. Pennsylvania prosecutors, for as long as I've been around in the job, have been on the leading edge of amplifying those rights through policies, procedures, and the law. Looking back, when the Commonwealth recognized we needed to work more closely with the victims, the legislature established a statewide victim advocate in 1995. As a result, now victim witness coordinators are working in our district attorney's offices throughout the state, helping prosecutors work more closely and more personally with victims. When we needed a better way to notify victims and families of an inmate's release or his or her transfer or escape from jail or prison, we initiated an automated notification system called PA7. That system is now a portal to other resources that are available to victims, including individual counseling, crime victims compensation, providing accompaniment, and crisis intervention. And when our most vulnerable victims, our children, needed an extra hand to make it through the journey through the criminal justice system, we established and supported child advocacy centers. Lynn Carson was one of our leaders in that category, right? And today's CACs are a multidisciplinary, collaborative effort that guide a young person through the system. It supports their physical health, their emotional well-being, and also, third on the list, but still very important, convicting the person who did that harm to them. And today, with partners like our state victim advocate, Jen Storm, the chiefs of police, the FOP, and others in law enforcement, we continue to lean in, we continue to look forward, and we continue to take action. Just the other week, as was mentioned previously, several bills to improve the criminal justice system for victims made their way through the state Senate. Again, you heard about the 50-0, that's fantastic. And again, supported by prosecutors, these bills are going to improve the ability to recover restitution. They strengthen and reform Pennsylvania's domestic violence laws. They offer greater protections to the victims of domestic violence and their children, and they hold abusers accountable. And the other measure, which we've already heard about much today, of course, is Marsy's Law. I think it's important for everybody to understand what Marsy's Law is intended to accomplish. Marsy's Law is really a wonderful bill, and it's designed to take the victims' rights in Pennsylvania that we have statutorily and make them part of the Pennsylvania Constitution. Pennsylvania prosecutors have supported Marsy's Law because we want to make sure victims' rights are as secure as they can possibly be. And we want victims to have as much or be as close to having equal footing with a criminal defendant as is possible under our Constitution. Look, the reality is this: district attorneys work hard to ensure victims are informed. We work hard to keep them part of the process, and we try to make victims whole to the best of our ability. But the reality is, we're human, we make mistakes, and there are times where we don't get the job done as well as we need to get it done. What's important at that point is that we own up to our mistakes and we try to fix it. And that's what we're intending and trying to do with Marsy's Law. So that when a victim, or that when we learn of a victim's rights not being followed through with, when they're left behind by the system, they still have these rights enshrined in the Constitution, and it gives all of us the best chance of righting the wrong that was done to that person. There's a lot of talk these days about criminal justice reform. The problem is that debate on criminal justice reform rarely, if ever, discusses the victim's rights. Marsy's Law will not take away the rights of the accused, but it will make sure that the rights of victims are heard and enforced with equal footing and strength. Throughout this week, special attention and focus is going to be paid to crime victims, but know that every day there are victim advocates, victim witness coordinators, and prosecutors, district attorneys, who will make crime victims their life's work, and it's our personal commitment to make their voices heard. Again, I appreciate your time and allowing me to speak to you here this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. It is now my pleasure to introduce Ms. Kat Rojos. Kat is a survivor, leader, and a volunteer for the Valley Against Sex Trafficking, also known as VAST. She has been volunteering for almost 2 years. She was born and raised in Lehigh Valley. About 5 years ago, Kat met VAST founder Heather Evans and embarked on a journey of healing and advocacy. With a small group of other survivors and VAST allies, Kat founded WINGS, Women Initiating Networks of Growth and Survival, which is now a program of VAST which empowers victims and survivors who have experienced human sex trafficking. Most recently, Kat was sponsored by VAST to attend training and become a certified specialist. I now welcome Ms. Kat Rojos.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the honor of sharing my story. I'm just one of many. The hope is to connect victims with justice professionals and expand the circle of care offered to reach all victims. Even though I only have a few minutes to share my story, how can I show you who I am? How can I let you see me? Before I learned how to tie my shoes, I experienced sexual abuse, drugs, and violence at the hands of persons who said that they loved me and were supposed to protect me. When I was 8 years old, I wanted a brand new bicycle. I remember the wise words of my father: before you can have a better bicycle, you must learn to take care of the one you already have. God often gives us small challenges before he entrusts us with greater blessings. That was the time I remember feeling hope, one of the greatest gifts my father gave me. When I was 10 years old, my father and my mother separated. And because of the separation, my mother's addiction became more severe. My father, who was my stabilizing presence, was now hundreds of miles away. Next, I remember my home falling apart as my mother struggled to care for us. My sisters were sent away with my grandparents, and I became a ward of the state. an amazing caseworker that I had. She instilled in me a part of my worth. She constantly told me I was a lovely child and hugged me. I felt loved. I received my GED while in residential treatment programs. I attended university in northern Pennsylvania at the age of 17. College was a beautiful time for me. I was learning about behavioral science, hoping to work with autistic children through music and through art therapy. During my first spring break, I came home to Lehigh Valley area and I met a man. We continued a long distance relationship when I returned to university. I got pregnant during my sophomore year. I had a decision to make. Do I end my pregnancy and continue school, or do I have my child and drop out of college? The decision actually wasn't that difficult. Because of the repeated sexual abuse as a child, I was told I would never have children. I had always wanted a family, and I returned back to Lehigh Valley. I moved in with my boyfriend, and we raised my beautiful daughter. Shortly after my daughter's birth, my boyfriend was arrested for drug trafficking. Again, my family life seemed to fall apart. How was I going to support my family? What was I going to do for work? About a month after his incarceration, my daughter and I were living in a seedy motel, and I was approached by a man, very attractive and well-dressed and charming. He was about 20 years older than me, and he complimented my beauty. He had said that I should consider a modeling career. He offered me a position as a ring girl at a local boxing organization. Life seemed safe again. I had a well-paid, glamorous job, and I was living in a nice efficiency apartment in the suburbs, caring for my daughter on my own. 6 months after successfully working as a ring girl, I was offered to attend a photo shoot for a modeling position in Washington, D.C. An assistant of my boss offered to accompany me. She dressed me and helped me get ready and took me to a gorgeous neighborhood in Georgetown. I arrived at a breathtaking home that looked like a palace. When we went inside, the assistant pulled me aside and said, "Look, this is how the night's gonna go. You're gonna go in there and you're gonna have sex with this guy for $600. And then we're gonna leave and we're gonna party." She looked at me and said, "Kat, don't act like you've never done this before. At least this time you'll be making money." I got physically sick. I was so scared, especially when I saw this man's room. There was a mattress on the floor and everything was covered in plastic, including himself. I thought I was gonna be killed. It turns out he was a germaphobe. The assistant gave me a drink and some kind of pill to relax me and told me if I didn't do this, I had to find my own way home. This was the first time I received money for sex. I continued this life of sex for money for several years, even returning to college and completing some more coursework. I met a nice Christian man during this time. He knew about my life and my past. And with his love and encouragement, I left the life again and was so happy and hopeful. He prayed over me daily. We eventually were married and had another child. Life was beautiful again. I was an active PTA mom. I had a garden and loved participating in my children's schooling. After being married a year, I decided to treat myself to a night with a girlfriend in New York City. I used to be an avid soap opera watcher, and they had an annual soap opera television awards. It was being presented in the city. I took a bus to the city and grabbed a private taxi. I went to meet a friend. I never made it after the afterwards. I never made it to the awards ceremony. I woke up 2 weeks later in a South Bronx hospital, naked, raped, and tortured. However, having escaped being a prisoner of the driver of a private taxi, this driver had knowingly picked up other women, raped them, and tortured them. Unfortunately, there was a victim who never made it out. She lost her life. Once again, my life was turned upside down. My husband, although relieved to have me home alive, wanted to pretend the entire incident never occurred. So instead of dealing with my trauma in a healthy way, I turned to alcohol. I drank daily as soon as the kids left for school and stopped at noon so I'd be ready to pick them up. I lost my marriage, my home, and eventually my children when I was incarcerated for DUI. While in the darkness of prison, God found me. I remember the exact moment. He gave me the Bible verse, Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. I was released from jail and struggled to hold a job with a prison record. After only a couple months out of jail, I turned back to the world I knew, sex for money. I tried to make it on my own, but it's a dangerous life, and I got intimidated quickly into having another man become my protector. He became my pimp. He was violent, controlling, quite different from my first trafficker. He beat me regularly and raped me. I had had enough at one point. I had decided I wanted justice. I wanted him to pay for what he had done to me and what he had done to other women. I worked with the DA and I worked with Homeland Security to obtain evidence and recordings to prosecute him for trafficking. He became the first man in Lehigh County under Act 125 to be sent to prison for trafficking. In 2003, he was sentenced to 30 years. Although vindicated, I was still struggling to stay out of the life. I was introduced to the Valley Against Sex Trafficking and the beautiful women of VAST. There I found love and hope. I have several mentors who have helped me with my healing. They've sent me to many trainings and conferences to provide me with the skills to speak and to lead. They've invited me to speaking opportunities like this one, to share my story and how I am now working with other women to the path of healing. It is for these women, the women who are still roaming the streets and being exploited and trafficked, that I'm here to speak for, to give them the same opportunities and the same opportunities that I've been afforded, and to walk with them and beside them. They've come for them to get to know the powerful and beautiful women they are. I'd like to thank Crime Victims Council for this venue to give people voices. Thank you.
Thank you, Kat, for sharing your story with us today. It is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Carla Christopher. Ms. Christopher is a social justice-oriented poet activist. She is an award-winning and multi-published author of poetic memoir, 2 children's books, and 3 collections of poetry, including the most recent, Strength, from the New York Quarterly Press. Carla is a community advocate with a background in case management. Carla is a poet that empowers and inspires her community to creative and interactive ways. I now welcome you, Ms. Carla Christopher.
I was born into being a crime victim. My mother was the victim of my father. And so the first several years of my life were hotels that you don't want to wake up in, but people aren't there to sleep anyway. It was living in the back seat of cars. It was living in the basements of well-meaning church people. It was anything that we could do to survive. And wouldn't it be wonderful if the crime was actually the end of the story for crime victims? But what I'm here to remind us of today is that it's not. Unfortunately, for most of us that are the victims of crime, that's just the beginning of our challenge, our struggle, and our journey. And it's not just fighting with the legal system and the law enforcement, the confusion of forms and visits and notifications, the constantly following newspapers, to the point where just knowing what's happening has to become a full-time job and an obsession that traps you in the cycle of being a victim over and over and over. It changes your body. It changes your mind. It changes the way that you breathe every day. And that being my normal, the normal that my mother had no choice but to bring me up in to survive, it changed what I knew about what the world should be. And so, to her heartbreak and to a shame I still struggle to conquer daily, I ended up in exactly the same position 30 years later, because that was all that I knew to center a life around. I made the decision to break the cycle of abuse and victimization thanks to the help and the mentorship of amazing organizations like the ones around the room here. But the reason why things like this are so important is because the crime doesn't end when that first moment stops. It becomes a life for the victim, just as much as it becomes a life for the criminal. I wanted to bring you some of the voices of women that I work with. As a Lutheran pastor in training, one of our missions is a group for survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and relationship violence. And the women, we don't usually gather to talk about the actual moment of crime. We talk about how it has changed our lives, created things like post-traumatic stress disorder, panic, anxiety, ongoing physical issues that keep us from even being healthy or sleeping well at night. This is the reality we fight against every day. And this is why it is so vital that we provide services for victims. Not just about law. It's not just about what is legal and what is necessary to make sure that new victims aren't created. It's because our victims need new life. This is my reality on the days when it's a little harder than others. This is the reality of thousands of individuals across Pennsylvania. They say with time it gets better. 39 years and I'm still waiting, fighting, crying, screaming, kicking feet against 400 thread count sheets, waiting for the peace of one full night's sleep. I'm just so tired. I'm afraid to wake up and open my eyes to take a long blink. I delay against sunlight, afraid to start my day, afraid of who or what will trigger it, afraid every minute, exhausted by the tension of waiting. Some days I'm afraid to walk out the door, to pick up that unlisted number. The unknown becomes horror, has already scraped against my windows on a late night, maybe just branches, but I can't fight the wary readiness of waiting that keeps every muscle tight. Afraid of what I will see. Afraid of what I will dream. I'm trapped inside my own skin, but I can barely leave the house. And so I pull my circle of safety tighter and closer around me, the globe of my world smaller than a playground ball. Smaller, smaller now. There's no room to stand tall in a box with shrinking walls and a sinking ceiling. I'm feeling short of breath. There isn't room even for myself. So pull. Pull the circle edges like a rubber band. Snap at the strings that form a periphery. Force your way inside so that you can be in there with me. Make room for us both. For a host of folks who need breathing room. We need you. Come stand with us. We need you. Come inside the circle. Please come and stand with us. We need you.
Thank you, Carla. This now will conclude the rally. I want to thank you all for attending this special event in order to honor crime victims and the advocates who work with them. Please make sure you take a minute to stop by and visit the tables surrounding the Rotunda. Following the rally, the Office of the Victim Advocate will be holding an event on Marcy's Law in room 39 and the East Wing. All are welcome to attend. Pizza and refreshments will be provided by the House Democratic Caucus. This will conclude our rally. Thank you.